Okay, let's dive right in. You've spent years meditating, reflecting, and validating your journey of letting go of the ego. You've done the hard work, shedding that ordinary vanity, greed, and craving. But today, I'm going to drop a philosophical bomb on that whole process. What if the ego didn't actually disappear? What if it just put on much nicer spiritual clothes? Like maybe it traded a luxury car for a meditation cushion, but you know what? It's definitely still driving. Welcome to this explainer, where we're unpacking a profoundly challenging idea about the survival of the self. Look at this question. If truth is still being owned, has freedom really finished its work? Now, what's really fascinating here is how it immediately challenges our basic, everyday understanding of what it actually means to be truly enlightened. We tend to assume that once the loud, noisy ego goes away, boom, we're completely free. But this forces us to stop and ask, wait, what if the person experiencing this newfound freedom is still subtly claiming ownership of it? I mean, is it really freedom if you're secretly proud of being the one who's free? Truth is not fully free as long as it is still being owned. That brilliant quote right there introduces the absolute core premise of Achyut Rateria's book, After I. In this explainer, we're exploring the lingering, hidden identity of the spiritual ego. And to be clear, Rateria isn't trying to disprove spiritual realization at all. He deeply respects it. Instead, he's asking a second-order question. He's looking at the afterlife of realization. Like, what actually happens after you wake up? Do you accidentally just become the awakened one? Moving into Section 1. Realization takes form, the core triad. To really understand this spiritual trap, Rateria gives us a core triad of concepts, and the very first term here is transcendence. Now, the crucial point we need to get is that transcendence is completely real. We aren't dismissing spiritual experiences as fake here. Transcendence is that genuine breakthrough beyond our ordinary noisy selfhood. It's that profound moment when the world is no longer approached with greed or anxiety or compulsive attachment. Think about that exact moment in your own practice where the mental chatter finally just stops and you feel pure clarity. The old ego truly collapses. But as we're about to see, the collapse of the old ego absolutely does not guarantee the self is gone forever. Because right on the heels of transcendence, the second part of our triad pops up, the embodier. The embodier is the one through whom realization becomes lived, communicable, and visible to others. But listen, here is the absolute danger zone. The embodier is the figure who takes that beautiful, formless awakening and turns it into a new, incredibly subtle identity. The event of awakening suddenly takes form in a person. Realization isn't just a fleeting event anymore, right? Now it belongs to someone. It becomes their posture, their style, their whole social role. They literally go from having an experience to being the experienced one. And finally, completing the triad, we have the idol. Now, keep in mind, Rateria is using this word in a highly technical sense here. He does not mean a false god or some celebrity. He uses idol as a really provocative term for the ultimate mystery of what remains when that spiritual ego, the embodier, is finally relinquished. It is form without ownership. It's the ability to be deeply present, to maybe even teach or guide, but entirely without the inward posture that says, hey, look, I am the realized one. So what does this spiritual ego actually look like out in the real world? Well, it takes on some incredibly recognizable everyday forms. There's the knower, who quietly possesses their insight like a shiny badge of honor. The witness, who uses detached observation as this final, superior hiding place. The silent center, whose intense inward gravity kind of becomes a subtle way of showing off. The guide, who absolutely relies on being spiritually useful to maintain their identity. Or, honestly, the trickiest of all, the one beyond identity, who ends up making a massive ego trip out of claiming they have zero ego. Just think about your own spiritual circles for a second. Ask yourself, are you the silent witness or just the proud owner of the silence? Let's move on to Section 2, the social life of realization, how communities build the embodier. You see, this spiritual ego doesn't just survive in a vacuum. It absolutely requires a social echo chamber. Let's trace how a purely internal realization hardens into a permanent social role. It always starts at an instant, right? A private breakthrough. But we're human, we're storytellers, so a few days later it becomes a coherent narrative. Months later, as people around them start noticing the change, expectation sets in. The community projects this role of depth onto the person, expecting them to always be the calm, wise one. And finally, years later, that prestige turns into formalized authority, a title, maybe an entire institution. The realization is now completely locked inside a social structure. As the text so perfectly notes, communities do not merely observe realization, they help shape its social existence. Spiritual identity is totally a two-way street. We, as seekers, desperately need an embodier. We want a face for truth, some kind of assurance that liberation isn't just an abstract promise, but something a real human being can live. So we project all our needs onto them, and the embodier, honestly often out of a genuine desire to serve, accepts that role. But the second they do, the trap snaps shut, and their spiritual ego is cemented. And that brings us to Section 3, the final surrender. Releasing the embodier. This is the absolute climax of Rateria's argument. If the ego has managed to survive by becoming the embodier, what's the next step? Well, it requires what he calls the second-order surrender. And this isn't your first rodeo where you gave up worldly greed. No, this is about relinquishing the spiritually refined identity itself. It's not about destroying yourself or turning into some emotionless robot. It is simply about releasing the inward dignity and the pride of being the one who is transformed. It's radical de-ownership, basically allowing the realization to stay, while the claimant of that realization quietly slips out the back door. This final surrender is incredibly demanding, and you can see why when you compare the two phases. The first breakthrough freed you from ordinary compulsions, the fear, the grasping, the basic selfishness. But this final surrender, it asks you to let go of the very luminous, beautiful, spiritually mature identity that actually saved you from your old ego in the first place. You have to give up being the good guy, the wise teacher, or the awakened student. You're literally being asked to surrender what has become genuinely good. Which leads us to Section 4, Beyond Transcendence, Form Without Possessor. So what exactly is left when we completely let go of that spiritual ego? If we strip away the embodier entirely, do we just disappear? I want to leave you pondering this profound, lingering question directly from the text. Can there be form without a bearer? Can you have presence without someone silently claiming, "This is my presence"? Can realization exist without the inward posture of the realized one? It points straight to a mystery, that idle phase we discussed earlier, that really represents the absolute ultimate frontier of non-ownership. Now, we have honestly only just scratched the surface of this massive mystery. If this deep dive into the hidden traps of the spiritual ego has sparked your curiosity even a little bit, Achyut Rateria's After I, Beyond Transcendence is an absolute must-read. The depth of philosophical rigor he brings to this whole afterlife of realization is something you truly just have to experience firsthand. If you're ready to break free from the final trap of the spiritual ego, this is absolutely your roadmap. To buy this book, find link in the description and take the final step beyond transcendence today. But before you go, I want to leave you with this one final thought for your own journey. The next time you feel a deep sense of spiritual peace or profound insight, just stop and ask yourself, are you simply experiencing truth, or are you quietly congratulating yourself for being the one holding it?